Let me ask you a question. What if I told you that your manufacturing facility might be capable of producing significantly more than it produces today, without hiring another person, without buying another machine, and without adding another square foot of manufacturing space? Would you believe me? Because after more than 20 years working in aerospace, defense, automotive, electronics, battery fabrication, and advanced manufacturing, I've seen it over and over again. There is capacity inside American manufacturing organizations that we've simply not realized. And sometimes that capacity is hiding in places that don't show up on the financial statements. It's hiding in the hours spent fighting emergencies. It's hiding in rework, defects, and material that's sitting somewhere for weeks waiting for the next step. It's hiding in engineers who should be working on improvements but are spending their afternoons troubleshooting problems that have already happened before. In supervisors who should be developing their people but are running around trying to get today's production back on schedule. And it's hiding in something even bigger: the opportunity costs of everything we don't get done because we're constantly dealing with what already went wrong. That's what I want to talk about today, because I think we need to change the way we think about productivity in American manufacturing. For a lot of American manufacturers, the strategy seems to become reactive by necessity. The economy slows down, orders decrease, leadership looks at the numbers, and one of the fastest things they can control is headcount. So people get laid off. Then demand comes back and the company needs those people again, so they hire, they train, they ramp up, and eventually another downturn comes. The cycle starts all over again. Sometimes companies genuinely have to make incredibly difficult decisions. I'm not pretending there is never a legitimate reason for a layoff, but I do think we need to ask ourselves a very uncomfortable question. Why have layoffs become such a predictable part of the manufacturing cycle? Because if we're repeatedly responding to predictive market cycles with the same reactive solution, that's not a real strategy. That's a reaction. And there is tremendous cost to that reaction that doesn't necessarily show up on the spreadsheet. Because every time you lay off experienced people, you don't just lose labor, you lose knowledge, experience, reputation. You lose the person who knew why a particular process was designed the way it was. You lose the person who could walk over to a machine and know something wasn't right before the problem became obvious. And you lose trust. When the workforce sees that layoffs are the company's first response to a downturn, people learn something. They learn that their future with the company isn't necessarily secure. And that changes how people behave. They protect themselves, their knowledge. They become less willing to speak up, less willing to take risks, and less willing to invest emotionally in the long-term success of the organization. That's not because they don't care. It's because they've learned to protect themselves. And that's why I believe respect for people and trust are not soft concepts in manufacturing. They're operational assets. They're foundational to continuous improvement. They're foundational to efficiency. And they're foundational to creating additional capacity. If you want people to help you build a better manufacturing company, they have to believe there is going to be a future for them in that company. And this is where I want to take this a step further, because I think we're making another short-sighted reactive decision in American manufacturing, and it's happening inside our continuous improvement programs. We're doing Kaizens, Lean, Six Sigma, and process improvements. We're asking people to identify waste and solve problems, But then we don't fully recognize what those improvements actually created. That is a huge problem, because if the results of a Kaizen aren't translated into a format that upper leadership can understand, quantify, and use to make decisions, the value can essentially become invisible. And when something becomes invisible to decision makers, it becomes very difficult to prioritize. And when it isn't prioritized, resources go somewhere else. That's the part I think we've been missing. I've facilitated Kaizens at several different companies, and in many of them, there was some reduction in scrap and fewer defects. Those are important, but sometimes the most important thing that happens isn't the thing that's easiest to put into a financial report. I remember one Kaizen in particular, there was material sitting at the beginning of a process for weeks, sometimes months, just waiting and waiting. The material wasn't defective. The operators weren't doing anything wrong. The problem was that we had a constraint, a bottleneck. So it accumulated. And when material sits, it creates all kinds of hidden consequences. It has to be handled, moved, stored, tracked. People have to manage it, inventory builds, and most importantly, the customer's waiting. We worked on the process together, and we dramatically reduced the amount of time that material was sitting there. Instead of weeks or months, it was down to days. Think about what that means. Less handling, less inventory sitting idle, better material flow, shorter lead time, better on-time delivery. More predictable production and potentially more capacity. That's a tremendous improvement. But here's the problem. Those benefits aren't necessarily sitting neatly inside a traditional financial report like cost accounting. They don't always show up as a single line item that says, this Kaizen created X dollars of value. And if that information isn't readily available, if it takes too long to calculate, if it isn't translated into the language upper leadership uses to make strategic decisions, then what happens? The value gets discounted. Not necessarily because leadership doesn't care or doesn't believe in continuous improvement, but because they can't see it. And that's a distinction that's incredibly important. Imagine you're the CEO. You're sitting in a board meeting, and the board wants to know where you're putting resources. Your shareholders want to know what you're doing to improve margins and grow the business. You've got financial numbers in front of you. You've got forecasts, you've got budgets, you've got cost reduction targets. And someone comes into that meeting and says, we completed a Kaizen and it reduced material waiting time from months to days. That's great. But the next question is probably going to be, how much did it save? And if the answer is we're still trying to calculate it, or we don't really have a number, or we think it probably created significant capacity, but we can't quantify that yet, then the board, or the CEO, the stakeholders are going to ask, what else can we spend this money on that we can quantify? And that's where I think American manufacturing has gotten itself into trouble. Because the things that are easiest to quantify aren't necessarily the things that create the most value. We can easily see a headcount reduction. We can see a reduction in a purchase price. We can see a reduction in scrap. We can see a budget cut. But capacity creation can be much harder to see. And if we consistently prioritize what is easiest to measure over what is most valuable, we can end up making very short-sighted decisions. This is why I think discounting Kaizen results, because we haven't quantified them properly, is every bit as short-sighted as jumping to layoffs every time the market has a downturn. Both decisions are reactive. One says demand is down. What can we cut? The other says, we can't easily quantify this improvement, so what else can we cut? And both miss the bigger question. What could we build if we fully realized the capacity already inside this organization? That's the question I want American manufacturing leaders to start asking. Because when you fully support continuous improvement, something different begins to happen. You don't just get a better process, more capacity, better delivery, more predictable production, customer satisfaction, more opportunity to take on work, more opportunities to grow revenue, and eventually you get more choices. Imagine an American manufacturer that has created significant additional capacity. Now the company has choices, more flexibility, but none of that happens if we're constantly operating from scarcity, if every improvement is viewed as an opportunity to eliminate someone. People will stop trusting the organization. And if every Kaizen is judged only by the easiest savings numbers to calculate, we will systematically underinvest in the very thing capable of creating the capacity we need. That's the cycle we have to break. And this is where my idea of radical alignment comes in. We have decades of knowledge about continuous improvement. The tools aren't the problem. The problem is the environment in which we're trying to use them. If the CEO says continuous improvement is strategically important, but the CFO only recognizes immediate cost savings, and the VP of operations is measured on this quarter's numbers, and middle management doesn't have time to support Kaizen, and supervisors are constantly fighting emergencies, and employees believe improvement might eventually cost them their jobs, how can we possibly expect these tools to reach their full potential? We can't. And this is what's been happening in American manufacturing facilities for decades. The entire leadership system has to align around the same objective. Everybody has to understand we're not doing this to make people work harder. We're doing it to create capacity and make the company stronger. We're doing it so growth becomes possible. So the next downturn doesn't automatically mean layoffs. We're doing it so people can build careers here, and so American manufacturing can compete. That's radical alignment. So here's your exercise this week. Go to the production floor and ask 3 people one question. What is the biggest thing that gets in the way of you doing your best work? And then listen. Don't defend the process. Don't explain why it can't be fixed. Don't tell them what management is already doing. Just listen. Then take what you hear and ask yourself, where are we losing capacity because we've allowed this problem to become normal? Then, if we solve this problem permanently, what would that make possible? That's the mindset shift. I believe American manufacturing has enormous untapped capacity, but we aren't going to unlock it by asking our people to work harder. They're already working hard. We're going to unlock it by removing the barriers that prevent them from doing what they're capable of doing. We're going to unlock it by giving continuous improvement the resources and leadership support it deserves. And I believe that shift could fundamentally change American manufacturing. I want us to become the strongest version of ourselves, our innovation, our courage, our entrepreneurial spirit, our willingness to solve impossible problems, combined with the discipline, trust, prevention, and continuous improvement necessary to build systems that actually support these strengths. I believe the tools are already here. I believe the people are already here. And I believe the capacity is already here. What we've been missing is the alignment to fully realize it. And that's what I'm here to help build. And if you believe America can lead the world in manufacturing again, join me. Join the movement.